Greetings to you as the East London District. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this presentation, and for those who are opting for video, you'll be able to see what I'm sharing on the screen, but we're also making this presentation available in audio form so that the most possible people will be able to benefit. This presentation is entitled Help, I'm Feeling Anxious, and I can start with asking you that question. In the last year or two, when last have you felt anxious? And many of you might possibly answer, well, I'm feeling anxious just as I'm listening to this presentation. A lot of these anxieties that we experience in the last few months or the last year or two have been brought about by the COVID pandemic and the resultant regulations, the lockdown, and so many things that have just upended our lives as we used to know them. And so this presentation is focused specifically on anxiety, but dealing wisely with COVID anxieties, COVID-related anxieties. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this presentation is my own. I'm merely presenting and sharing with you an article which was written by the pastor of counseling at the Summit Church, Brad Hambrick. And you're able to access this article at his website, bradhambrick.com. So even though this article isn't original to me in this presentation neither, I, out of pastoral concern, was impressed that this presentation might be as useful to you as it was to me when I read through it. And I pray that that may be the case indeed. To get going, we're going to ask the question, what's the first step in dealing with COVID-related anxieties? And you will see that the first step to dealing with COVID-related anxieties is the first step to dealing well with anything that we're faced with in life, and that is accurate assessment. Accurately assessing what it is that we are faced with. The author makes an example of a stomach ache. So say, for instance, you have a stomach ache. We know that a stomach ache doesn't just appear. And so when we want to deal with the stomach ache that we feel, we have to ask ourselves the question, is this an ulcer that is causing the stomach ache? Is it perhaps food poisoning? Is it constipation? Or is it perhaps lactose intolerance? And there can be many other reasons for a stomach ache as well. But accurately assessing what causes the stomach ache is of primary importance, because the way you apply the remedy is going to be determined by the results of the accurate assessment of the actual stomach ache and the reasons that are causing it. There are many good remedies out there for stomach aches, but if you apply the wrong good remedy to the wrong stomach ache cause, then it's not going to be useful. Let me use another example that I'm just putting out there for your consideration. How about in the kitchen? So say you're faced with a mango and a coconut, and you want to decide how best am I going to approach this situation so that I may make the most of these fruit that are before me. Now, I am pretty certain that the paring knife that you might use to tackle the mango and to peel the mango is not going to be the same knife that you're going to use to try and tackle the coconut. And the reason is obvious. If you've never been faced with a mango or a coconut before, you're very easily going to make an accurate assessment by just picking them up and feeling whether they are hard or soft and how best you are able to approach making the most of this fruit. And so there's a simple example from the kitchen about accurate assessment being the first step to dealing wisely with the situation that we're confronted with. How about another example? The weather. I don't know exactly when weather reporting started, but even in the Bible, Jesus speaks to the Pharisees and he tells them, you're not able to tell the signs of the times, but yet you're able to look at the weather and see what the next day's weather is going to be like. And ever since weather reporting became more accurate, there are many, if not all of us to some degree, that consult the weather report when we want to plan our week, whether it's outdoor wedding, whether it's just planning how to dress for the day, or whether it's planning an outing. We rely on an accurate weather assessment to be able to make a informed decision of how best to go forward. Now, granted, weather reports aren't always that accurate, but we do use them as an example of accurate assessment to determine what the next step would be for us to move ahead and deal with the situation that lies ahead with us wisely. The author Brad Hambrick goes on to use another example of Bible interpretation. Now, think with me for a moment. How does interpreting Bible passages relate to an accurate assessment if we are to make the most wise use of those Bible passages? Well, here's an example. If you are reading a Bible passage, you are asking yourself, what genre is this Bible passage located in? For example, if it's located in the book of Genesis, then it falls under the genre of narrative, and you're going to apply certain interpretive tools to a narrative passage that you aren't going to apply, for instance, to the next one that we have here, poetry. For example, the Psalms. The way you interpret poetry and the way you interpret narrative in the Bible is not going to be the same, and if you apply the wrong tool to the wrong passage, then you're going to end up with results that are not desirable and, of course, not accurate, and therefore not as useful as they can be. How about letters in the Bible? Here's an example of the book of Ephesians. We call it the book of Ephesians, but actually it's the letter that Paul wrote to the Ephesians, the church at Ephesus. And so letters are interpreted differently than poetry and differently than narrative. And then, of course, here is a book that we as Seventh-day Adventists and many other Christian denominations are well acquainted with, the book of Revelation. And you know that the genre for the book of Revelation for the most part is prophecy. And so the way you interpret prophecy is going to be different to the way you interpret the other books that we've mentioned as well. And so we see here that even in Bible interpretation, the way we interpret a specific Bible passage well determines an accurate assessment of the genre that Bible passage falls under. And so we're going to look at how this accurate assessment applies specifically to COVID-related anxieties or anxieties in general as well. The author Brad Hambrick guides us wisely in this direction when he writes the following statement in this article that we are drawing from in our presentation. He says the following: knowing how to respond to our COVID-related anxieties requires actively assessing the type of anxiety we are experiencing. Now, this is an important statement to make because often we worry about many different things, but the anxiety might feel the same. You might feel your heart racing, you might feel your chest closing, you might feel your blood pressure rising, or the different ways that we as different people respond to anxieties. And so on the face of things, it might seem that all anxieties are the same because they make us feel the same. But all anxieties aren't the same, and that's what we want to really get into in our presentation. Brad Hambrick goes on to say, it is not just that we worry about many different things. There are also different types of anxiety. There are also different types of anxiety. So if it is so, and I think that throughout our presentation you're going to discover this, if it is so that there are different types of anxiety, we want to map the way forward wisely to make sense of the different types of anxieties that we will come across. Now, I'm not doing this out of a clinical psychologist's perspective. I'm merely doing this out of a pastoral concern, wanting to help you and myself gain basic guidelines as to which anxieties we deal with and how to distinguish between them, and of course how to engage with each one of them wisely. So what does mapping the way forward look like for you and I as we enjoy this journey together and make sense of the anxieties that so often beset us in even more intensified forms since the COVID pandemic arrived into our lives? Well, we're going to spend a few sessions looking through the different types of anxiety. I'm going to mention the three types that we'll be looking at briefly to you. Firstly, we'll be looking at factual versus hypothetical anxieties, what the difference between these are and how we engage with each one of them in different ways. We're also going to be looking at rational versus irrational anxieties and what those involve. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at temporal versus ultimate anxieties and what the differences in them require of us if we're going to deal with them wisely. I know many of us are short of time, short of attention, short of energy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide up these presentations in short clips, dealing with each one of these in a different presentation so that you can watch the one, and after you've watched the one, you would have gotten some pointers of how to engage wisely. And then I'm going to share with you some reflection questions as well, so that after each one of these anxieties that we explore, you're able to reflect on what you've just heard, and you're able to make good sense of that format that we've discussed. And when you're ready, you're able to move on to the next presentation, which will explore the next type of anxiety that we will be speaking about. Ultimately, we are doing this for your own personal benefit and growth, but also being equipped to share. We want to equip ourselves not only to become more wholesome in our thinking, in our experience of the world and the anxieties that face us on a daily basis, but also to equip ourselves to be able to share with others, whether it be friends, whether it be work colleagues, anyone in your sphere of influence. Once we've equipped ourselves, we want to be able to share this information with others as well. That's the way that Jesus loved people. His love always spreads wider and wider and wider, and it's never appropriate, nor is it wise, to try and keep the love of God to ourselves. And so, in that vein, we are closing this section of our presentation on how to deal wisely with COVID anxieties with 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 3 to 4. Many of you are familiar with this passage, and this is what it says in verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort. So we can be confident even as we move forward and tackle the different types of anxieties that we struggle with and feel anxious even while we're exploring these things. We can turn to and rely on the God of all mercies and of all comfort to give us the necessary strength and comfort to deal with these things. Not only to do that, but verse 4 goes on to say that this God of all mercy and comfort comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction as well, with the comfort we ourselves have been comforted with from God. And so I pray that you may join me for this next session as we tackle the first set of anxieties, and that you may be built by these things, that you may be uplifted and also equipped to share the comfort that God has given you. God bless, and see you in the next session.